Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to give a brief introduction to the next novel we'll be reading together, Ice by Anna Kavan. I'd like to tell you a little about Anna Kavan and also offer you some guidance as to how to read this novel. The first thing you should know about Anna Kavan is that Anna Kavan was not the name she was given at birth. She was born in 1901 in England, and her name was Helen Woods. Her family was wealthy, but appears to have lost much of its money over the course of her childhood. She got married and published a number of novels under her married name of Helen Ferguson, and she was moderately successful as a writer, but her life was very difficult. Her marriage fell apart, and she married again, and that marriage fell apart. One of her children died. She ended up suffering from severe depression, and she became addicted to heroin. In her late 30s, she attempted suicide and was placed in a mental institution. And when she was released a few months later, she legally changed her name to Anna Kavan, which was the name of a character in one of her previous novels. She wrote a book of short stories based on her experiences in the institution called Asylum Piece, and her writing style changed radically, becoming far more dreamlike and experimental. She spent the rest of her life writing and publishing under the name Anna Kavan, struggling with depression and heroin addiction, spending time in various sanatoriums, and never really having great success as a novelist until her final novel, Ice, was published in 1967. But the year after that, she died. There has recently been a resurgence of interest in her work. Her novel Ice was just re-released as a Penguin Classic. A new edition of her short stories, titled Machines in the Head, came out this year, and there have recently been a number of critical essays published about her in magazines, like The New Yorker, which is how I discovered her work. I think one of the reasons there's been a resurgence of interest in her work is that the themes of her strange stories suddenly seem very relevant. The themes of her novel Ice, in particular. The plot of Ice is simple, and the prose is pretty clear and direct. However, Ice is a strange novel, and I would like to give you some guidance as to how to read Ice. The narrator of the novel is an official or scientist who has been sent on a mission to help deal with a global climate emergency. Gigantic blocks of ice are forming at a rapid rate and taking over the planet. In the chaos, many countries are going to war over resources, and many governments are collapsing. The narrator is also on a personal mission. He's obsessed with a woman with whom he once had a relationship and who is now married to someone else. Early in the novel, the woman leaves her current husband and seems to try to disappear from the lives of everyone who has ever known her, and the narrator, hearing this, chases after her. That's the basic setup of the book. But what makes the novel really interesting, and also very strange, is that the narrator is not mentally stable and suffers from hallucinations. So he'll be telling you the story of the climate crisis and his search for this woman in very dry, matter-of-fact prose, and then all of a sudden, without transition, he'll enter into a hallucination for several paragraphs. You'll be able to tell when he's hallucinating because all of a sudden he'll describe something that doesn't make any sense, that would be impossible. For instance, in the beginning of the novel, he's driving down a dark road at night, and then all of a sudden he sees the woman alone being surrounded by gigantic blocks of ice. What also makes the book interesting is the vision of the climate crisis it presents. The world is in complete chaos, and lots of dramatic things happen very, very quickly. So quickly it can be hard to keep track of all of them. But you don't have to keep track of all of them. It doesn't matter. This is a book where the plot is not nearly as important as the psychology of the characters and their experience of living in a world that has become a nightmare. And although many things happen in this book, the basic story is always the same. The narrator is obsessed with this woman and looking for her, and is meanwhile dealing with the consequences of an accelerating environmental catastrophe. Ice is disturbing and disorienting, and I'm not even sure that I like it. But I keep rereading it. I think one of the reasons this novel has become popular again, and why people are drawn to it, is that it really eerily reflects what it's like to live in the world right now. Kavan wrote this novel in the 1960s, before we really knew about global warming and climate change. But the novel evokes the current climate crisis really precisely. Horrible climate emergencies are taking place in the world right now. The wildfires on the West Coast and in Australia, the hurricanes that are increasing in size and strength, the deadly heat waves in Europe. But in the middle of it, our lives still sometimes feel very normal, and a lot of the time we remain focused on personal concerns. That sense of fragmentation between the huge events we know are happening on a global scale and our small scale day to day problems, this novel captures better than any book I've ever read. This is a strange novel that feels like a dream, but it also feels like a dream that someone who was worried about the future might have right now. So brace yourself and get ready for ice.